There are people who enter your life like a resounding bell in a grand hall, and then there was her, quietly stepping in on a Monday morning, as the early breeze still carried a lingering chill, a wrinkled white shirt, an old pencil skirt, just long enough to cover the quick stitch marks, and a pair of sneakers faded from too many hand washes. Elena Monroe, 21 years old, final year student at NYU, majoring in international business management. She didn't stand out in a crowd. She wasn't strikingly beautiful, nor was she fashionably dressed, but her eyes, calm and luminous, held a story yet to be told. That morning, she arrived at the main lobby of Lindholm Enterprises, a multinational corporation specializing in technology and sustainable investment, headquartered in the heart of New York's financial district. What no one knew was that this company had been founded by her grandfather, Charles Lindholm, back in the 80s, and was now run by her father, Jonathan Lindholm, the current CEO. Yet in her internship application, Elena chose not to use the name Lindholm on her resume. She wrote only, name, Elena Monroe, address, East Village Dormitory, Manhattan, no mention of her lineage, no requests for special treatment, no personal recommendation. Just one email was submitted through the internal recruitment portal. Like hundreds of other students, she wanted to be judged on her own merit, not on a title, not on privilege. That morning, she was called like any other intern. Elena Monroe, please proceed to the 5th floor, HR department. Bring your ID and transcript. A receptionist pointed without even looking up. No one suspected that the petite girl, with her clear face and unwavering eyes, was the very person who might one day change the future of this entire corporation. And the elevator Elena stepped into that day was not just carrying her to the HR office. It was lifting something far greater: prejudices, human hearts, and layers of pretension onto the stage of a drama no one saw coming. The 5th floor of Lindholm Enterprises was unlike any other. There were no sleek glass walls or curated art on display. This was the world of paperwork, meeting calendars, personnel files, and relentless deadlines, the administrative engine that powered everything behind the scenes. Without a shred of glamour, Elena stepped in, her head slightly bowed in greeting, but the only response was the rhythmic clacking of a keyboard. A woman in her 40s, hair tied tightly in a bun, silver-rimmed glasses perched on her nose, looked up from a stack of documents. The nameplate on her desk read, Angela Ward, Senior Office Manager. Her eyes swept over Elena, from the pale cloth ribbon in her tied-back hair to the worn-out Converse on her feet. Then came a faint smirk, the kind that hovered between politeness and mockery. You're Elena what? Elena Monroe, ma'am. I've been assigned a 3-month internship in the administrative department. Angela didn't answer. She simply flipped through a list, crossed off Elena's name, and gestured toward a pile of papers on the left side of her desk. Those are HR files. Get them photocopied, sorted by date, and submitted to me by 5 p.m. A younger staff member spoke up gently. She doesn't know where the copy room is yet. Angela cut her off, her voice sharp as a paper cutter. Then she should learn. We all didn't know once. Then she turned to Elena, her disdain no longer masked. We don't need dreamy students coming here for a taste of the real world. This is real work, not a playground. Do you understand? Elena pressed her lips together. She didn't protest. She only nodded. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Her voice was soft, but it didn't shake. She lifted the pile of documents, almost as heavy as her entire frame. No one offered to help. She headed to the copy room with steady steps, even as her spine began to throb with pain. At the end of the day, long after the others had gone, Elena was still there. The room was silent, save for the hum of the printer and the flickering fluorescent lights. Her hands were reddened by paper clips. Her eyes burned from dust, clinging to old files. From the far corner, a security guard, an older black man named Mr. Graham, glanced at her, then approached. "You're still here." His voice was raspy but warm. Elena looked up with a faint smile, her eyes gleaming behind her round glasses. "I want to finish it. I don't want anyone waiting because of me." Mr. Graham studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're different from the others. They don't see it. But I do." Elena bowed her head, not sure if it was to say thank you or to hold back tears. That was how her first day ended. No warm welcome, no kindness, only paperwork, cold stares, and one small girl carrying her quiet dignity through a place ruled by ego. What no one knew was that several floors above, in a panoramic view office overlooking the city skyline, CEO Jonathan Lindholm had just signed off on a confidential document, approval granted for Elena Monroe to participate in real-time operational immersion within the corporation. Signature, a handwritten note. No one is to help the girl. She must learn. She must stand on her own, just like her father once did. Day 3. Elena still arrived early, as she had always done since high school. She brewed coffee for the entire department, exactly as listed in the memo, wiped down the meeting table as instructed, and arranged the chairs no more, no less. 10 a.m. An emergency meeting was called. All team leads from administration, legal, and HR were present. Angela, the direct supervisor of Elena, stood at the front, her expression ice-cold, a stack of red-marked documents in hand. A confidential contract from the legal department was mistakenly sent to a third party. A sensitive file was leaked. Angela's voice was calm, but razor-sharp. The room fell into dead silence. All eyes scanned the room, suspicious, searching. Angela's gaze swept across the staff, then landed on Elena, who sat quietly at the end of the table, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Elena Monroe, you were assigned to sort and distribute internal files on Monday, correct?" Elena nodded, heart beginning to race. "Then why was file contract 14 confidential sent in an email to Allura Partners?" Angela slammed the document on the table, a sound that cracked through the silence like a slap across the young woman's face. Elena froze, flipping through her notebook. She was certain she had checked each file, each label. She opened her mouth. I remember only sending files marked as approved. I didn't send anything confidential." Angela cut her off. "So you're denying responsibility?" A murmur spread through the room. Some frowned. Some shook their heads in dismay. A male colleague, Darren, muttered, loud enough for the sting to land. "Typical dreamy interns at a big firm. Everything they touch falls apart. Maybe next time we should let them intern at coffee shops." Another scoffed with a crooked smirk. Elena sat there small, under the sterile white light. Her face burned. Her ears rang. It felt like someone had wrapped their hands around her throat. But she didn't cry. After the meeting ended, Angela walked up to her. Her voice dropped low, but the sharpness remained. "I'll be recommending we terminate your internship early. We don't need clumsy hands here." Elena stood up. Her hand clutched her notebook so tightly, her knuckles turned pale. "I didn't send that file. If necessary, I request access to the system log to prove it." Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm, clear. Angela paused, ever so slightly. "You think you're in a position to demand anything?" she hissed. "Elena has the right to defend the truth." A voice spoke up from the back of the room. All heads turned. It was Mr. Graham, the elderly security guard, standing at the doorway. His gaze was calm, but unwavering. "The printer on the 5th floor broke down on Monday. I saw the girl go to the 3rd floor. to handle the files, and someone else used her computer while she was away. I can testify to that. Angela's face went pale, but she said nothing. She gripped the documents tighter, then walked away without another word. Elena looked at Mr. Graham. Her eyes glistened, but still she refused to let a single tear fall. On the top floor, CEO Jonathan Lindholm stood by the tall window, watching the endless stream of cars far below. His assistant stepped in, handing him the latest report. The system access log is from the 5th floor. He read the final line. The corners of his lips lifted faintly. Some tests are necessary, not to measure how skilled someone is, but to see if, when humiliated, they still hold on to their dignity. That night, Elena returned to her dorm in East Village, her slender shoulders damp with sweat after the long subway ride. She didn't turn the lights on right away. She just stood there, still, in the dark, watching the city lights flicker beyond the window frame. Her mind replayed every glance, every word from the meeting. You think you're in a position to demand anything. And then, Mr. Graham's deep voice echoed through her like a faint light at the end of a tunnel. The girl has the right to defend the truth. Elena sighed. She used to believe if she worked hard enough, was kind enough, people would notice, people would understand. But she had forgotten something. In some places, people only see your designer clothes, your wallet, and your last name. And hers, she had deliberately left behind. Meanwhile, on the top floor of Lindholm Enterprises, a closed-door meeting was underway with CEO Jonathan Lindholm and 3 senior advisors. System logs confirm Elena wasn't the one who sent the file. The IT assistant reported it was Darren Miller, a contract employee in legal. He accessed her computer while she was away from her desk. One advisor let out a sigh. He's been warned before for misusing access. It's clear now. Jonathan nodded, unsurprised. Then he opened another file. Inside were candid hallway photos of Elena, handwritten notes, and an email from NYU that read, Ms. Monroe is an outstanding student, resilient, humble, never complains, always volunteers to help her peers. A silver-haired advisor turned to him. You plan to reveal her identity this soon? Jonathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he took out a fountain pen and scribbled a note on the top of the folder. Assign her to Project Rise, a program reserved only for the most promising interns, a direct pathway to leadership. Another advisor looked at him knowingly. So, she's passed the first test. Jonathan smiled faintly, his eyes carrying something that looked like pride. Not everyone born into privilege chooses to walk away from it, but if they do, the least they can do is prove they're worthy of that choice. The next morning, when Elena arrived at the office like usual, she was summoned to the HR department. For the first time, the HR manager greeted her with a softened expression. Elena, you've been reassigned to assist with a special project. You'll be working directly with the strategic team for the next 3 weeks. All documentation is ready. Elena blinked, stunned. Me? And I thought I was being let go. The woman gently shook her head. This decision came from higher up. None of us had a say in it. And then she added something that made Elena freeze in place. There are people who have been watching you since the beginning, and you've shown them something not everyone has: dignity, even when no one handed it to you. The 42nd floor Lindholm Enterprises strategic office was unlike anything Elena had ever seen. Here, no one gossiped in the hallways. No one played music during work hours. Everyone moved with mechanical precision, like coded fragments of a greater algorithm. Their singular goal, growth, metrics, and market domination. She was placed with the product analysis team, working directly under the head of strategy, Madison Greer. A woman in her 30s, striking, cold, and ruthlessly demanding. On Elena's first day, Madison barely glanced at her resume. I don't care where you come from or which school you went to. Here, I only care about results. Get a single data point wrong, and don't bother coming back the next day. Elena nodded, understood, and just like that, she began. For the days that followed, Elena worked from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. She learned to analyze market data while eating cold sandwiches, learned to deliver a 3-minute growth forecast with 0 stutters, learned to remain calm under questions that sliced straight into her self-esteem. The first time, she was told to redo a spreadsheet 12 times over a 0.02% discrepancy. The second time, she was called invisible during an internal pitch, even though it was she who drafted the initial proposal. But she never complained, never gave up. And that made some people start to notice. 1 week later, during a strategy team meeting, Madison laid out a challenge. We have 3 weeks to launch the new product, but the Boston market is slipping. If we choose the wrong distribution channel, we'll lose at least 3% of our regional share. No one had a clear answer. Then Elena, still just an intern, spoke up, her voice soft but steady. What if we reanalyzed the inner city population distribution? I think convenience stores located in the transitional zones between urban and suburban areas might serve as a strategic middle ground. Those areas tend to have high concentrations of young adults, stable mid-range incomes, and a strong affinity for tech. The room went silent. Madison narrowed her eyes. She didn't respond directly, just said, "Run the analysis. If it's wrong, your name's off the list." 3 days later, Elena presented the report, line by line, chart by chart, segment by segment, flawless, down to the decimal. When she finished, the room was silent again, but this time it was the silence of recognition. Madison sat upright. Then, for the first time, she spoke a single sentence, "Better than I expected." That night, as Elena stepped out of the building, it was gently raining. She stood beneath the awning, rain soaking her shoulders, but her face lit up like a lamp in the night. A message lit up on her phone from an unknown number. "You're on the right path. Don't be in a rush to let others know who you really are. What you're building must be built with your own steps." "Dad," Elena stared at the screen, and then she smiled. Monday morning, Elena had just set her coffee cup on the desk when an unexpected email popped up in her inbox. Required presence in meeting room 42B, executive floor, 8:30 am. Subject, submarket analysis presentation, Boston transitional zone. She froze. 42B was a closed-door room reserved for the executive board, C-levels, and top shareholders. She checked the sender, Elliot Grafton, head of strategy. No greeting, no explanation, just a directive. But Elena knew this was the first time she would step into a room where real power resided. 8:29 am. She stood in front of the frosted glass doors, heart racing. In her hand, printed market analysis. A security staff scanned a badge, then looked at her and asked, "Intern? Are you sure you're meant to be here?" She showed the email. He raised an eyebrow, but nodded her through. Inside, the room was long, lined with walnut paneling and warm ceiling lights. 12 people sat around a sleek, black glass oval table. Everyone is in tailored suits. Every face is unreadable. At the head of the table sat CEO Jonathan Lindholm, who didn't look at Elena at first. He was listening to Elliot's report. Seated next to him, Angela Ward, the same manager who once recommended terminating Elena's internship. Elena stood behind the screen, waiting. Elliot finished the first segment, then turned to her. "Miss Monroe, you have 5 minutes to present your thesis." Elena stepped forward. Her hands trembled not from fear, but because she understood. Every gaze in this room had once shaped the fate of thousands. She opened the slides, her voice calm and steady. The Boston Transitional Zone is not a dead market, as traditional data once implied. It's a zone of recalibration, and if approached correctly, it can be the reverse springboard to reclaim northern regional growth. She pointed to income stratification diagrams, consumer behavior models, and post-pandemic migration flows. When she finished, the room stayed silent. A female director nodded slightly. Another turned to the CEO and asked, "Who is this girl? What department is she from?" Angela spoke up first, her tone still edged with disdain. "Administrative intern, later reassigned by exception to strategy." Another director scoffed. "An intern? Producing reports this polished?" Finally, Jonathan spoke. His gaze fell on Elena. His voice was low and firm. "She's not just an intern. She is Elena Monroe, the only third-generation Lindholm family member, named in the executive shareholding will." The entire room went still. Angela froze. Elliot glanced at Jonathan, as if he had long awaited this cue, then nodded in confirmation. A silver-haired director murmured, "Monroe, that's his wife's maiden name." Jonathan rose from his seat, placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder. "I let her begin at the very bottom. No one knew, because I needed her to remember this. Only those who've once been underestimated truly understand the worth of every human behind each report." Elena said nothing. She simply looked toward the sunlight filtering through the glass walls, as if every mask, every layer, was quietly dissolving. But in her heart, she repeated one silent truth. "I never wanted them to fear the name Lindholm. I only wanted them to change because of how I chose to live." The meeting ended earlier than usual. Several executives still hadn't recovered from the shock. They looked at Elena the way one looks at a question yet to be answered. Angela, meanwhile, stood frozen. Since the moment the words Lindholm Air were spoken, all colour had drained from her face. Out in the hallway, the sharp clack of her high heels echoed in a frantic rhythm as she rushed after Elena, who was quietly walking toward the elevator. "Elena, Elena, please wait a moment," Angela called out, breathless. Elena turned around. Her face showed no anger, no triumph, just calmness, as if everything Angela had ever done belonged to a past Elena no longer wished to revisit. Angela stood in front of her, struggling to swallow her pride. "I didn't know. I'm truly sorry for the way I treated you." "If I had known," Elena cut her off, gently but with a sharpness like a blade wrapped in silk. "If you had known I was the heir, you would have treated me differently. But if I had only ever been Elena Monroe, the intern in wrinkled shirts and worn-out shoes, would you still have scolded me, sent me to the copy room, and humiliated me in front of a boardroom?" Angela fell silent. Elena never raised her voice, but every word she spoke landed with the full weight of truth. "You weren't wrong for not knowing who I was. You were wrong for believing I wasn't worth respecting no matter who I was." Angela stood there, speechless. It wasn't a reprimand. It wasn't revenge. It was a mirror held up to her conscience. Elena gave a quiet nod, then turned to leave, but just before stepping into the elevator, she paused and added, "I'm not asking anyone to bow. I only hope that people like me, just yesterday, no longer have to remain silent." The next day, an internal announcement was released. Angela Ward was officially reassigned to the Ohio Data Division, no longer permitted to oversee intern personnel. The intern supervision role was granted to Madison Greer, who had personally mentored and recognized Elena's contributions. In a small conference room, Madison handed Elena a folder. "You have the opportunity to join the International Market Research Team. 3 months in Tokyo, if you're willing. Elena looked at her, surprised. Why? Do you trust me? For the first time, Madison smiled gently. Because you never had to shout to be heard. You worked to be worthy, not to prove a point. That's how truly strong people survive in a world full of facades. 3 weeks later, Elena stepped off the plane at Haneda Airport, wrapped in a pale beige trench coat. The spring wind brushed gently through the first blossoms of cherry trees, and soft pink petals fell upon her shoulders. She stood among strangers, but felt a quiet, unfamiliar peace. No one here called her a clumsy intern, and no one here knew her as the heir to the Lindholm Empire. Here she was just Elena, a young woman, come to learn and to live. At the Tokyo branch office, everything ran with the precision of a Swiss watch. Elena was assigned to the Green Future Project team, a strategic initiative to develop renewable technologies across Asia. She worked alongside people from all walks of life. Yuki is a soft-spoken environmental engineer whose eyes burned with quiet passion. Daichi, a financial analyst, wore lo-fi headphones from morning till night. And Takumi, the project lead, cold, strict but unshakably fair. One evening, over bowls of ramen in a tucked-away shop beneath a glowing red lantern, Takumi looked at her and said, "You don't seem like someone born to be a boss." Elena smiled. She didn't argue. "Because I've done the copying, served tea, wiped whiteboards. I know what it feels like to be looked down on." Takumi was quiet for a moment, then said, almost gently, "Maybe that's why people will want to follow you, instead of just obey you." Elena lowered her head, not from embarrassment, but from emotion. 3 months passed. Elena stood on the 16th floor of the Lindholm Tokyo Tower, looking down at a sea of city lights, an ocean that never slept. The Green Future Project was approved. Her proposal to harvest energy from urban traffic was selected for pilot implementation in Osaka. Then came an email from Madison. "New York needs you, and your grandfather wants to see you again after all these years." Returning to New York, Elena didn't go straight home. Instead, she took a detour to Stamford Care Home, where Charles Lindholm, founder of the Lindholm Group, was living out his final days. In quiet solitude, she entered his room. He was sitting in a rocking chair, reading an old book. At the sound of her footsteps, he looked up, his eyes, clouded by age, suddenly lit up, as though the sun itself had risen inside them. "Elena," she knelt down and took his hand, the same hand that had once signed thousands of contracts, that had built an empire, now trembling like the last leaf of autumn. "I didn't ruin everything, Grandpa," she whispered like wind breathing through leaves. He smiled softly, his voice raspy with age. "I was never afraid you'd ruin things. I only feared you'd forget who you are." Elena rested her head against his hand. The scent of old paper and dried camellias on the table, all of it whispered to her, "Everything great begins with something kind and simple." A week after returning to New York, Elena received a letter printed in deep blue ink, bearing the embossed seal of the Board of Directors. "We cordially invite Ms. Elena Monroe Lindholm to attend a special meeting. Topic: appointment for the position of Co-Director of Global Strategic Development. Boardroom, 50th floor." A soft golden light filtered through the room, casting warmth over rows of dark leather chairs. 13 individuals sat around the long table, faces that once regarded her as nothing more than a naive intern, now waiting to hear from the sole heir of Charles Lindholm. Her father, Jonathan, said nothing. He simply watched his daughter quietly, patiently. The chairman finally spoke. "Elena, Lindholm Group needs a successor. You've proven your capability. We are ready to welcome you into the role you deserve." Elena stood. She wore a modest olive-toned dress, not expensive, but well-fitted and quietly dignified, just like the woman herself. Her voice was steady, clear, unrushed. "Thank you for your trust, but I'm not taking that seat. At least, not yet." A ripple moved through the room. One board member furrowed his brows. "You're declining the executive position." Elena nodded. "I'm not declining because I fear responsibility. I'm declining because there's something I must do first, something I believe is more important than any seat at this table." An older director leaned in, curiosity in his tone. "And what might that be, Miss Elena?" Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. She placed it firmly on the table. "I want to rebuild Lindholm's internship program from the ground up. I want to create an equal opportunity task force composed of people who were once overlooked, underestimated, or excluded, who now have the power to assess the system." Silence fell over the room, but Elena continued, her eyes glowing not with power but with purpose. "If a corporation is only strong from the 50th floor up, then it's not truly strong. I want to begin from the bottom, from the chair that tightens bolts, from the janitors, from the baristas no one remembers, and rebuild from there, the right way." Jonathan watched his daughter, unable to hide a soft smile. That man who once wore out his shoes chasing seed funding now saw a version of his younger self in a young woman who bore the Lindholm name, but lived with the heart of a Monroe. The chairman placed his hand over the folder and nodded. "You don't need an executive title to lead. As of today, you will head the cultural transformation initiative of our corporation." 3 days later, an internal email was released from the strategy office launching the ground floor program, a new recruitment and training initiative for individuals from underserved communities, public, schools, and non-traditional backgrounds. Founder, Elena Monroe Lindholm. Message: "No one is born beneath us. Sometimes we're just standing too high to see them." 1 month after the launch of the ground floor, the 5th floor of Lindholm, once a place of silent dread during Elena's early internship days, had changed. The old wooden bulletin board was replaced with a touchscreen display showing the employee support schedule. The break area was renovated with soft sofas, free hot tea, and a corner called the anonymous feedback box. But the most remarkable thing was that someone had returned, not to start over, but to pave the way for those just beginning. Elena walked into the administration office, dressed in a modest beige suit, without a name badge, without bodyguards, without cameras, just herself, and a quiet smile. The young staffer who once stood up for her was now the new HR team lead, and Mr. Graham, the elderly black security guard, was sitting in the lounge, holding a cup of ginger tea. Elena approached him and bowed gently. "I did what you said. I kept my kindness, even when no one was watching." Mr. Graham chuckled, his voice low and warm. "And now hundreds of other kids will see. That kindness is still a way to survive, even in a world that often forgets it." The following week, in the main lobby of Lindholm Group, a private event was held, not for the press, not listed on any official calendar. Well, just a quiet moment of honor. A video played, scenes of Elena bending down to help a delivery staff unbox equipment, scenes of her hand writing thank you notes to the maintenance crew, scenes of her hugging a young intern and saying, "You don't have to please anyone. Just live kindly and be better than the person you were yesterday." When the video ended, Jonathan Lindholm took the stage, his voice filled with emotion. "The world once believed that power must come from the top, but today we honor someone who proved that real strength comes from a heart that listens and hands that aren't afraid to get dirty." He turned to his daughter, Elena Monroe Lindholm, the one who didn't choose the CEO's chair first, because she understood Before you can lead a company, you must learn to stand beside the people no one remembers to name. That evening, Elena stepped out of the building and looked up at the Manhattan sky, shifting with the breeze. The city lights, car horns, and hurried footsteps were just as they'd always been. She tightened her grip on her bag. Inside was not a contract, not a document, but a worn-out old ID badge that read, Intern Elena M. She had kept it since her very first day. It was a reminder that once she was invisible, once she was silent, and once she had been underestimated just because she didn't look like success. But she had lived, she hadn't fallen, and she had chosen to forgive, to build a justice softer than laws, a justice born from the human heart. And so, the quiet girl in a wrinkled shirt, once sent to make photocopies in a basement, had become the one who lit the way for those left in the shadows, not by raising her voice, but by the way she walked forward,